Welcome to Robert Heinlein's The Day After Tomorrow. First of all, let's have a quick look at that cover, which is a truly gorgeous one. It comes up strangely on the screen, so it's actually a shattered skull with a strange colour little device under here. Some people care about publications and stuff. It is a New English Library. It's in reasonably good condition for me, and I haven't owned this one for long. Reading it, I discovered that either I've never read this Heinlein before, or I've read it so long ago that I didn't really remember much about it. Now, I really like Heinlein. If you look up onto the bookshelf, that really shady area there is full of Heinlein. And that's the first message. If you like Robert Heinlein, you will probably like this book. He's not for everyone, and I have noticed increasingly that a lot of people don't love his writing. And it's not just young readers, it's older readers who are starting to see some of the trends in his writing and uncomfortable with some of his concepts, which is quite interesting because Heinlein was actually extremely influential for his day. He was against racism, he was against apartheid, he was against sexism. He was well ahead of his time, and he, in many social regards, and he also was a champion of hard sci-fi and actual science in science fiction writing. All these things that these days many people are into. But his version of equality hasn't aged well. And in The Day After Tomorrow, there are a lot of concepts that particularly have aged poorly. So this book will definitely not be for everyone. If you like females, there is, I think, not one single female, I kid you not, in this whole book. There's reference to one woman who joined the organization, but then they don't want any more. There's actually no female. It might as well be an entirely and utter XY world. Forget people of any of the multi-spicy genders that we have these days. Forget it. It's just all basically cis, mostly white males. So that's the thing. The racism is a tricky subject that one has to kind of work around in this one. So early on in the book, I can't remember which page, I didn't make a note of it, he writes down, what would it be like, this crazy new world in which the superiority of Western culture was not casually accepted, of course. A world in which the stars and stripes did not fly with the pigeon over every public building. Oh my God. Americans, you've got to love them. Now, I really hope that Heinlein had some element of tongue-in-cheek while he was writing that, but I'm not sure. From some of his other novels, I think he would. From his background of extreme equality, I think likely he was being at least a little bit humorous about that. Fingers crossed. All I can say is fingers crossed. So, the back cover of this sets the scene, and it's pretty poorly written. It's pretty much the same one that's on Goodreads. It looks like a cut and paste job. We actually start off with a small group of men in the Citadel, a hidden underground laboratory, who are listening to an account of America having been entirely destroyed. Washington destroyed completely before the government could escape. Manhattan in ruins. That leaves with a click, the broadcast stops. Basically, what it's saying is that leaves no central organization, no military, and no government. And at that point, our main protagonist breaks into the property. He's taken 12 days to get there from, one assumes, Washington, but one's not certain. And this character is a prototype that Heinlein uses a lot. I think it's called the competent man. It's basically a guy who takes charge, and he loves this man in charge who can do a bit of everything and who is a leader. Their speech patterns in Heinlein books often remarkably the same. Basically, if you read a lot of Lazarus Long, Future Worlds, I think they were called, Future Worlds? There was an actual name for that series, never mind. His Lazarus Long character is basically every male character he has. The competent man, or whatever it's called, who can do everything and is a leader and etc. etc. It's something that Heinlein does. If you're not okay with that, then you're probably not going to like any of his books. It's not a rounded character. It isn't really a character at all. They may have doubts and they may have issues, but ultimately they're going to be victorious, and you know that. This future world is a situation in which there has become a Pan-Asia country or consolidation, and we never really hear a lot of history about it. We pick it up in bits and pieces throughout the novel. So it seems that pretty much all of Asia Minor and all of Asia Majora have become a single unified block. Something bad's happened to Europe. We never find out much about that. This block seems to have absorbed all the countries that exist into it. And America filed a non-intervention type doctrine that meant that no one went into this Pan-Asia country and no one interfered, and so their intelligence was lacking. And the point is made throughout that intelligence is the most important weapon in a war, because without that, you know nothing. And that is how Pan-Asia came to successfully invade America very, very fast and very completely. America couldn't do anything because they didn't have the correct intelligence to deal with it, and the reason they had it was because of this non-intervention policy. I think a lot of Heinlein's political opinions come into the whole structure. Now, the Pan-Asian isn't really defined terribly strongly. The non-intervention contract came into effect when Russia invaded China, and USA thought that there was going to be enough in China to keep Russia busy, so they wanted to stay away with it. But what actually happened was China absorbed Russia. They also absorbed India. We learn that they learned from the India absorption that religions were not to be messed with. So religious organizations are the only one in America where Americans are allowed to gather. Americans are completely enslaved by the Pan-Asian. And the Pan-Asian sounds like he's a consolidation of Chinese and Japanese, both in features and in culture. I gotta say, there's a lot of things about this future worldview that don't hold together. For example, Pan-Asians that have invaded America don't approve of mixing the races, and so basically any American of Asian and North American origins is shot out of hand. For a Pan-Asian country that has absorbed all the countries in Asia, including Russia, that makes no sense, and there's lots of other smaller things that don't make sense, but they don't really matter if you're enjoying the book. Initially, I didn't. I picked it up, and the first few pages, I was thinking, I've lost my Heinlein mojo. I'm not enjoying this. I'm not going to be able to deal. But it improves. Slowly but surely it improves. By the third mark, I was hooked. Last night, I was up till, 3 o'clock or something, trying to finish it. By the end, it was fascinating and really intoxicating. Once you get past the racism, because the racial slurs in here are out there. I'm not even sure if Goodreads YouTube is going to let me say them, but there's a lot of slant eyes, flat faces, and worse. It gets a lot worse if you can't cope with that, and I don't blame you one bit if you can't. This book is not for you because it never stops. So our competent man takes over this secret research facility where they were researching various types of, I'm gonna say waves or radiation. I didn't follow it. And here is the other thing. Heinlein was big on the hard science. The hard science here is acute. But basically from the researching they've been doing, they have discovered a way of making all the hemoglobins in a body consolidate or explode or lose pressure, a whole range of things. There's a huge number of applications for this new type of wave. And they are developed here And Heinlein explains it, and I can't follow it. It's fascinating. I read it. It all kind of seems to make sense. And for a physicist, or I don't know, some sort of scientist out there can probably say whether it's accurate or not. It is really, really interesting, and you can definitely see Heinlein expounding on how science fiction needs to have its science in order before you keep going. Having developed these, we've got essentially at this point 6 or 7 men only. That's obviously not enough to defeat all the millions of Pan-Asians that have taken over America, and they've taken it over very competently. People need passes to travel. Every Westerner can instantly be detected because they look like a Westerner, and they are a slave, and they're treated as such by their masters. It's a kind of hokey setup, but it's described as very efficiently, and it's described quite well. I was getting John Marsden Tomorrow When the War Began vibes off it, and the one thing that Marsden did well and Heinlein didn't was he managed to create an enemy without pointing the finger at any actual race or country. So while there's actually very little racism in John Marsden's Tomorrow When the War Began series that you can see there over my left shoulder, but it's clear that Australia has been invaded by Asians in that book. He manages to glance over the issue. You don't get the acute racism that you do get here. I'm not saying he's wrong. A lot of these slurs and a lot of the behaviors are consistent with what happened in the war in Vietnam, which the Vietnamese call the American War, and the Americans and the Australians call the Vietnamese War, but Vietnam doesn't see it that way. Racial slurs were the way in which the Allies in that war managed to dehumanize the people they were killing, and that's common throughout wars. Dehumanization of your enemies is a thing that happens, and probably always will happen in the entire future of humankind, since we don't seem able to stop having wars. So none of that is something that strikes me as incorrect or unbelievable. It's just not easy to read. So since they've only got 6 men, they know intelligence, our competent man in charge, whose name I admit I've forgotten already. He finds out that one of the men there was actually a hobo rather than a scientist or a military, and he sends him out among the hobo camps of America, and we get a little bit of an interesting touch about the story of hobos, vagabonds, etc., grifters. There's a little bit of social history there. Heinlein often does that. He'll pick a tiny topic of interest to him and he'll insert it into the book to good effect. So he does this here. And he comes back with a whole lot of information about the social structure, and based on that, Ardmore is the name of the person in charge. Colonel Ardmore, I think, who bursts in. Ardmore doesn't have a military background, which he doesn't at first tell the 6 or 7 troops that he's trying to bring back to life from their deep depression. What he has is an advertising background. So he sets his scientists, primary among them Calhoun, to find out the gadget that Dr. Ledbetter was working on, which managed to kill Ledbetter and the majority of the Citadel. They just dropped dead and they weren't quite sure why. But Calhoun goes through Ledbetter's notes. He figures out how the ray works and how to target it by race. So once they've got a certain amount of genetic and molecular information about the race they're targeting, they can set it for race, which is not impossible, but I think that the biological science indicates that it wouldn't be possible in the way it's used here, but I don't believe that when the Day After Tomorrow was written, that would have been certain. So this was speculative science and not necessarily racist, just biological science. Okay, it was copyrighted by Robert Heinlein in 1949. That's definitely before we knew really how much about DNA or colloidal molecules. So yes, that bit of speculative science, accurate when the book was written, less so to now. Ardmore, as a marketing person, comes up with the idea that they need to get a lot of people, they need to get them on board, they need to form an underground fifth column type situation where they work from within without the conquerors knowing it. And to do that, he sets up a church. Now, religion in America is a thing that I don't truly understand. It's got the way this religion is described is as existing. I don't think that would work in most countries. It certainly wouldn't work in most countries today, but in America it probably would, because America has a far stronger religious structure. It's fascinating. He creates a generic religion. The great god is called Moto, something like that, and it's got different aspects. And they use manifestations of their science to create miracles. And because the conquerors have already learned in the past that the religion of the slaves has to be considered intact, they managed to go all the way through the world, and using this organization that they build through churches and with the assistance of this incredibly advanced weapon, they conquer America back. Now, my feeling, I made some notes as I went through it, but there's a couple of things that stood out to me. On page 84-85, there's a point where he's bribing officials in order to get the first church up and running. And he was writing about bribes, and how despicable it is that these Pan-Asians accept bribes so readily in their culture. And I'm going, dude, you're American. Your entire citizenship basis relies on tips. How's that different? Anyway, that's just me. There's a lot about the religion that was really interesting. And of course, Heinlein has done religion before. He did it with Strange in a Strange Land. He really, really excavated what religion is and what it does, how justifiable it is, and the things it gets away with. Here he does this again. He's using religion in a very, very specific way to achieve his purpose, which is liberating America. Fascinating how he does that. I really enjoyed it. With complete and utter cynicism. Unlike Strange in a Strange Land, Ardmore and his people have no belief in this particular religion. And a few of the people need to overcome this resistance, since they are genuinely religious. And they're trying to promote this false religion for the purpose of saving America. Quite fascinating. Now, it seemed to me reading this, that this is, so many people love Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, which I have to say is the most readable of his novels that I've read so far. This seemed like almost a dark mirror to it. In both of them, you've got an alternative America that has been conquered by an Asiatic people. I know that in The Man in the High Castle, what you had was the Japanese owned the Pacific side of it, and the Nazis who won the war owned the eastern side of it, the Atlantic side of it, and there's something weird happening in the middle there. But here we've got America that's been conquered by an Asiatic source, and the attitude of the Asians to the Americans, the attitude of the Americans to the Asian conquerors, the whole motif of the conquered land is so completely different that I think that if you enjoyed Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle for the social structure that was never as fully explored as I felt it could be, you might either really enjoy this version of an alternative America, or you will loathe it beyond compare, because Philip K. Dick seemed to be pretty on board with the Asians in charge of America, and Robert Heinlein really, really wasn't. Anyway, a good book. It's a thin one, but it took a bit to read because there's a lot in there between the religions and the different characters and how they interact, and this battle plan that slowly builds up, and the conquered race of America versus the Pan-Asian conquerors. There's a lot in there. The science is certainly beyond me. So if you like hard science, I would recommend read it for the hard science. If you like alternative Americas, definitely. Unless you're going to have a problem with racism and can't get through it. Unless you really can't get through the fact that female humans may not be considered entirely human here. Just saying, that's the vibe it gives off. So, yeah. However, going past all that, this was actually a really good book, and I didn't expect it to be for the first half a dozen pages. Heinlein, a good Heinlein, one of his better Heinleins, better than 666, The Number of the Beast, for example. A nice, short, consistent, tight story with a lot of stuff in there. If you can get past a couple of issues. I'm glad that I got past a couple of issues. I'm not giving up on Heinlein yet. Read good books.